When people show things in the media, they're always shown in the negative light. When something about Africa is talked about, it's normally bad, it's normally violent, it's normally something about the country or a disease broke, and it's never good. So your perception is what people have forced you to believe.
The media has long held the power to shape how people see the world, and few places have suffered more from that power than Africa. For generations, Western cameras have captured only the struggle and never the soul. News outlets and documentaries have focused on poverty, war, and disease. They built an image that Africa is a continent that needs to be saved by the West. This one-sided portrayal has convinced millions to see Africa as a story of sorrow rather than one of strength and achievement. But in 2023, Kevin Hart spoke out about a truth that reached audiences around the world. He had traveled to South Africa to promote his satirical action film Die Hart and to connect with African creatives, writers, directors, and actors he hoped to collaborate with in future projects. During his visit, he shared that coming from America, he had believed much of the propaganda about what South Africa was supposed to be. Yet when he arrived, he found something completely different. Vibrancy, warmth, and life. The love he felt from the people shattered every false image he once held. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at how Africa's rich story has been twisted by the media and how voices like Kevin Hart's are helping change that. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy watching videos on Black representation in media. And let's head straight to it. The distortion of Africa's image did not begin with television or the internet. It began centuries ago, when European empires first cast their eyes on the continent and found a way to turn conquest into righteousness. In 1455, the papal bull Romanus Pontifex, a decree issued by Pope Nicholas V, gave Spain and Portugal the so-called divine right to invade and claim foreign lands under the pretense of spreading Christianity. It was a license for domination disguised as salvation. Through religion and exploration, the lie took root that Africa was dark, uncivilized, and in need of Western guidance. From then on, Africa was not described as a place of kings, scholars, and builders, but as an endless frontier of tribes and heathens. This framing justified everything that followed: the slave trade, colonization, and the erasure of entire civilizations that had once rivaled or surpassed Europe's own. When the printing press and early newspapers spread across Europe, those same ideas traveled with them. Writers and explorers began describing Africa in ways that fed European fantasies and fears. They exaggerated what was unfamiliar and ignored what was sophisticated. Entire kingdoms like Mali, with its libraries and architects, were reduced to curiosities. These writings became accepted truth, shaping textbooks, sermons, and later the stories told in classrooms and films. The narrative was so powerful that even as the world entered the modern age, it clung to the old language: primitive, savage, uncultured. Words that had once served conquest were now repeated by journalists who claimed to be neutral observers. By the time cameras replaced quills, the damage was done. Colonial propaganda had already painted Africa as a place of endless struggle. So early documentaries followed the same script. Poverty and violence were shown as the natural state of African life, while progress was portrayed as a gift brought by outsiders. Even independence movements were filmed through the lens of Western pity rather than African pride. The stories people consumed shaped how they acted. A continent that gave birth to civilization itself was reduced to a symbol of despair. This long history explains why Kevin Hart's realization in 2023 struck such a chord. His confession that he too had believed the propaganda was not due to ignorance, but because he, like many others, had been conditioned to believe in those lies. Understanding this origin is the first step toward undoing it, because the narrative was never accidental. It was engineered, and fortunately, it can be unlearned. So now, let's break down the stories that the media has often shown about Africa and why they may not be entirely correct. The first story often told about Africa is poverty. For decades, the same images have been used to evoke pity. Thin children, cracked soil, crowded villages. These pictures appear in charity ads, news reports, and school materials. They create the illusion that Africa cannot survive without help from the West. But poverty shown without context is deception. It hides the reality that Africa is also home to some of the fastest growing economies on the planet. Nations like Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, and Rwanda are leading in technology, manufacturing, and finance. Innovation hubs in Lagos and Nairobi are driving digital revolutions that rival Silicon Valley's pace. Yet this reality is often ignored because it does not fit the script of weakness and dependence. The second recurring story is conflict. Civil wars, coups, and militias dominate global headlines, while the peace treaties, democratic transitions, and rebuilding efforts that follow rarely earn airtime. Western audiences are left believing that instability defines Africa, when in truth, African nations have shown some of the greatest resilience on Earth. Communities rebuild after destruction. Nations form unions and regional peacekeeping forces to preserve stability. These victories go unnoticed because they do not reinforce the idea of a continent in chaos. The result is a dangerous illusion. A world convinced that Africa is always burning when much of it is building. The third story is primitiveness. This is one of the oldest and most damaging. Western journalists and filmmakers still use words like tribal and backward, ignoring the deep sophistication woven through African languages, architecture, and traditions. For centuries, Africa has been portrayed as if civilization arrived only when outsiders came, when in truth, some of humanity's greatest intellectual and cultural achievements were born there long before Europe's rise. Timbuktu, for instance, was not a myth or a desert ruin. It was one of the world's earliest universities. Between the 14th and 16th centuries, it attracted scholars from across North Africa and the Middle East. The city housed thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, law, philosophy, mathematics, and medicine. Students studied under renowned scholars, and its libraries became symbols of a literate and intellectually vibrant society. Yet these contributions were nearly erased from Western history books, replaced by the false image of a continent without writing or science. The same pattern applies to Egypt's medical and architectural advances. Long before modern Europe, Egyptians practiced forms of surgery, dentistry, and pharmacology that were documented in papyrus texts like the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents known. The precision of the pyramids and temples reveals an understanding of engineering and mathematics that still puzzles modern scientists. These were not primitive acts of instinct. They were expressions of complex reasoning and scientific discipline. Yet Western narratives often detach these achievements from their African roots, labeling them Middle Eastern or Mediterranean to avoid crediting African genius. Further west, the Kingdom of Mali flourished as an empire of wealth, trade, and governance. Under Mansa Musa in the 14th century, Mali's influence stretched across West Africa, linking regions through trade in gold, salt, and manuscripts. Its cities like Gao and Djenné were centers of architecture and scholarship. In Benin, artisans were casting intricate bronze and brass sculptures centuries before the European Renaissance, depicting kings, queens, and battles with extraordinary realism. These works were not crude ornaments, but historical records in metal, evidence of organized governance and advanced artistry. Even after British soldiers looted Benin's treasures in 1897, their beauty was undeniable. Western museums displayed them proudly, yet rarely admitted what their existence proved: that African civilizations were already advanced, creative, and organized before colonial contact. By stripping these histories from the narrative, media and academia have reinforced a lie: that modernity is a Western invention and that Africa lags behind. This distortion comforts those who wish to maintain a sense of superiority while denying Africans their rightful place in the story of human progress. The damage of these lies go beyond perception because it erases identity. When a people are told repeatedly that their ancestors built nothing, their pride and sense of possibility are quietly stolen. And that theft of identity is exactly what Kevin Hart recognized the moment he set foot on African soil. His story, though personal, reveals how deep that conditioning runs. Before his 2023 trip, he admitted that he hesitated to travel there at all. He had heard warnings about disease, danger, and disorder. Doctors told him to take unnecessary vaccines. Friends asked if he was sure it was safe. Every layer of his understanding had been built on secondhand fear. But when he arrived, that illusion began to crumble. In South Africa, he was greeted with laughter, hospitality, and life that felt both foreign and familiar. He saw cities that mirrored any in the West: Johannesburg's skyline, Cape Town's beaches, Durban's energy, and realized how misleading his previous beliefs had been. He spoke about his surprise, saying the media had made him expect a world of danger, only for him to find a place that reminded him of home. His reaction was honest and disarming, because it exposed how powerful misinformation can be, even for someone who considers himself informed. What Kevin Hart experienced in Africa was a reminder that perception can be a prison when controlled by someone else's lens. His realization echoed what generations of Africans and descendants in the diaspora have felt. The moment you see the truth for yourself, the false stories collapse. Across the diaspora, countless artists have shared the same sense of revelation when they first set foot on African soil. For many, it feels like returning to a home they were never allowed to remember. The late Nipsey Hussle once described his visit to Eritrea as a turning point in his life. He saw families who lived with pride, communities that thrived through cooperation, and a culture that celebrated work, art, and spirituality without apology. It changed how he viewed himself and the stories he wanted to tell. Dave Chappelle spoke about finding peace in Durban, saying that Africa gave him stillness in a world that constantly demanded performance. These experiences reveal something powerful: the gap between the Africa imagined through Western eyes and the Africa that exists in reality. The same awakening has shaped the work of other global artists. Beyoncé's Black is King celebrated African creativity, fashion, and tradition, using music and visual storytelling to reclaim heritage that had long been misrepresented. Lupita Nyong'o, born in Mexico and raised in Kenya, has used her influence to uplift African narratives in Hollywood, speaking about the beauty of her roots and the dignity of African identity. Idris Elba's projects across Sierra Leone and Ghana focus on developing local film industries and bridging creative communities. Even in music, the global rise of Afrobeats, with artists like Burna Boy, Wizkid, and Thames, has reintroduced Africa to the world, not as a continent of struggle, but as the pulse of global culture. Each of these figures helps rewrite the narrative that colonial media built centuries ago. Through art, music, and storytelling, they reveal the modern Africa that has always existed: bold, creative, and unstoppable. As more of these stories reach the world, the veil of distortion grows thinner, and the truth of Africa stands clearer than ever before. If you made it this far, thank you for watching and for giving Africa the attention it deserves. If you believe stories like this should be heard, share this video so others can see the truth beyond the headlines. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more powerful stories about Black excellence, history, and representation. Every view, every share, and every voice helps rebuild the image that centuries of bias tried to erase. The real Africa is thriving, and together, we can make sure the world never forgets it again.